This video contains major spoilers for the movie Iron Lung, so if you haven't seen it, bookmark this page, turn the hell around, go watch the thing, and come back later. You've been warned. So, I watched Iron Lung on opening night, and I haven't been able to get this film out of my head since. What's worse is I've come up with a theory, and now the theory is in there, I have to keep replaying the scenes in my head over and over again, trying to see if the theory fits, and lo and behold it does. So before I start, this is just a theory, I'm not saying this is right, but I am going to put across several pieces of evidence that do support the theory. My theory is Simon was dead to begin with. He died in the Eden explosion, which he probably caused, before the film starts. And the whole film is actually showing his purgatory. The Iron Lung, the Blood Ocean, the worm thing, the whole mission is his purgatory. And he's locked in that purgatory because of the guilt of what he's done, of killing all those people, and also because he can't accept that he's dead. He becomes trapped in a world where there's still hope for his freedom, hope even for him to be the hero. And as the film progresses, he gets more and more hints of the fact that he's dead, which he continues to ignore until eventually he accepts his fate at the very end. So without further ado, let me go through the evidence that I think at least supports this theory. This film is all about guilt. It's all about being trapped. It's about claustrophobia. It's about not knowing what's real and what isn't, about a slow descent into madness. Being trapped in a vessel, being welded into a vessel that you can't escape. Having hope that you will be able to free yourself, and that hope gradually diminishing as you realise you can't. Even the psychological effects of the mission, gradually going mad, gradually hallucinating more and more. All of these things could point towards some kind of purgatory that is being fashioned and put together by his own mind. I also feel that the stages of grief were represented in the film several times. Denial, hope, anger, even bargaining, when he's trying to tell Ava that he has something worth her time, worth bringing him up, worth setting him free. And ultimately, acceptance. All these things, the entire emotional identity of the film, do seem to support this idea that he is in purgatory. It's also made very clear that Simon does feel guilty when he hurts people, because of his reaction to irradiating people, irradiating the crew members when he takes the picture. So this points to a character that, despite being named the Butcher, isn't just a callous, cold-blooded murderer. He is very capable of feeling guilt. A lot of guilt. Perhaps enough guilt to plunge himself into some kind of limbo, because he's killed a lot of people, and he blames himself for that, regardless of whether it was directly his fault or not. Simon's physical state seems to change back and forth as the film goes on. This could be because of his mental state. If he's hallucinating, it could just be a product of that. But I'm pretty sure that I noticed things appearing and reappearing. For example, that distinctive blood splatter that he gets on his face when the blood comes through the window and splats on his face. It forms a distinctive pattern which, as far as I can remember, does disappear throughout the film, but then I noticed it again later on. So it seems to reappear. Also, I'm pretty sure he takes his jacket off quite early on in the film and then he ends up with it back on again. Now, before you say, oh, maybe he just put it on. Okay, yeah, maybe. But we know it's hot in there. Why would he do that for a start? But also, why not show it? The direction of this film seems to be very specifically tailored to making things feel real. They show us things that they don't have to show, like his reactions to certain things happening, how long he builds the map for. They don't have to show all that, but they did because they wanted to make it real. So why not show him put the jacket back on? Then there are other related things like, why does he gain an oxygen? And more importantly, why does the oxygen stop depleting after that? For the first half of the film, the oxygen depletion is a very real threat to his survival. That's part of the suspense, and yet it seems to disappear halfway through. Is it because, as I thought at one point, the blood itself has some sort of properties that make that happen, like it's oxygenated blood? Possibly. But could it be that the threats aren't real in the way we think they are? Because he's already dead, because it's purgatory, because he's just been tormented with all this stuff. The oxygen levels are false. The depth is false. Everything that's happening is false because the worst has already happened, and now he's just being tormented for it. There's also the fact that the ship seems to hop from one space to another, which I know is from the game, but could have easily been a way of depicting this story of the film essentially taking place outside of space and time as we understand it, in some sort of other reality where things don't really make sense. Now, anyone who's seen the film will have noticed things get real weird real fast. Things get very, very surreal and very, very physical horror right at the end, like the last 10 to 15 minutes. There are elements of physical horror throughout, but for the most part, 85 to 90% of the film is psychological horror and suspense, and then things get bloody and gory and body horror-y just at the end. Which leaves me asking why. Maybe things getting suddenly very weird, suddenly very surreal, and very physical horror has a meaning. And maybe that meaning is acceptance. Everything gets real weird real quick because Simon has at this point realised what's going on. He's realised that he is the cause of all this. And everything is coming to the front of his mind all in one huge explosion. And he's seeing the truth, but he's seeing it suddenly. This could explain why most of the film is him being trapped and feeling that there is hope, but probably not, but trying to find a way to survive and being so determined to survive, and then the end of the film is suddenly all hope has gone. Everything's died. The only thing left to do is surrender yourself to it and admit that it's happened. The submarine descends into the depths of the blood ocean. And that can be taken absolutely literally, of course it can. But it could also be taken metaphorically as a descent into hell. He also repeatedly mentions how hot it is. Now, I have seen a few comments online giving reasons as to this, and they're all perfectly valid. The blood is hot, it's the radiation, it's just a part of the moon's environment. But what else is hot? Hell is very hot. All I'm saying is, it's another hint. It's another symbol of hell and purgatory. And the writing does make a point of saying several times how hot it is, so it must be important. Aside from one moment, you never see Simon eat or drink. And we know that he's supposed to be there for several days. Now, this isn't impossible, but he doesn't mention being thirsty or hungry at any point. Now, I know that movies aren't usually very realistic in this respect anyway, but the reason this jumps out to me for this film is that the writing and the direction seemed very much crafted to make you believe this was a real person in this scenario. They showed things that they didn't have to show, just for the sake of making it realistic. Things like Simon not remembering what keys Ava told him to press on the keyboard. Things like showing Simon gradually build up the map over time. They didn't need to show that. They did it because it felt real. It made you believe this was a real man actually going through this experience. So why not add to that the fact that Simon is hungry and thirsty? If anything, that would have added an extra layer to this feeling of there's no hope of survival. I think it was a deliberate choice to show that Simon is not a living biological entity. He believes himself to be alive, but he doesn't have the biological needs that a living thing would have. Another hint that he's already dead to begin with, and he just hasn't come to terms with it. As a side note, just to show this is the kind of story that Mark might write, this does kind of parallel what he did with his short film Wilford Mother-Loving Wharfstache. In that, the detective believes himself to be alive, and he only starts to realise he isn't because he tries to remember specific events, and those events don't exist, so he can't remember them. He can only remember his general reason for being there, and that leads to his reality essentially collapsing as he realises he's actually dead. There are a few things in the film that I think could represent Simon's subconscious trying to speak to him in one way or another, either telling him that it's all his fault and he deserves to be here, or telling him this isn't real. The main way I think this is expressed is through the radio voices, the people that are talking to him, Ava and the other people. Now, these could absolutely be real people, real characters. I'm not saying that they're not, but there are hints that certainly some of them are hallucinations, are in his head. He actively says that. And the voices that are talking to him seem to change in their characteristics as the film goes on. For example, Ava starts off being quite grisly. She doesn't care about him, she doesn't care about his fate. He's lucky to be alive. She just wants him to get the job done and stop whining. But at the point when Simon disappears and then reappears, she suddenly seems to develop quite an emotional attachment to him. Now, I'm not saying she wouldn't be happy, I guess, that they've found him, but at the same time, would she be? Because for the first half of the film, she doesn't give a shit whether he's alive or dead. At this point, Ava tells him her name. She seems upset that she didn't know his name. She comes to rescue him. Granted, because he has the data box, but still. It seems like a U-turn in her character. Similarly, the presumably dead person from the other ship, the ship that he finds that's destroyed, which Simon actively says is probably his mind playing tricks on him. She also seems to change. What starts as a source of comfort seems to turn into a source of guilt, a voice that actively tells him he deserves to be here. And perhaps the biggest clue here that the voices could be his subconscious is towards the end when they all start talking over each other, with one voice telling him to do one thing and one voice telling him to do the other thing. This almost feels like a angel and devil on the shoulders moment. His mind is messed up by this point. He doesn't know what the right thing is to do. It almost feels like his own head is arguing with itself. These voices sound to me like Simon trying to tell himself how to get through what he's going through. And then they change, and they become voices telling him what he's done and why he's there. On a side note, and this may not be important, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but Ava has a scar over her left eye, and her eye is blind. This could just be a character design choice. I'm sure there's plenty of reasons why she would have a scar living in these conditions. But it also occurred to me that at the end of the film, Simon's left eye has like a big swelling on it. So could it also be that Ava's injury is almost foreshadowing what Simon is going to go through? Because it's already happened. Because it's always going to happen. About a third of the way through the film, Simon discovers a necklace that represents the Eden group that he was a part of. This shows that a member of Eden used to pilot the ship before him, and the note that this person leaves indicates that person chose to die in the submarine rather than return to the surface. The emotional reaction that Simon has to this necklace seems pretty extreme. Now it could just be that the necklace represents Eden and Eden reminds him of everything that went wrong, but it almost seemed more personal than that to me. It almost seemed like he knew this person, but there was no indication that he did, and there's no reason he would know who it was anyway. There's no name or anything, so there's no reason he would know who was piloting the ship before him. So I think this could be a symbol of guilt over what he did. It could even represent somebody who died that he knew personally, who died in the explosion that he caused. Simon wraps the necklace around his wrist, which almost feels like a symbol of being tethered, that this is tied to him, that the guilt is tied to him. And this is supported by the sort of epiphany, I suppose, that he has about halfway through the film, where he thinks he's died, and he wakes up in the blood ocean, and he rises out of the blood ocean, and he sees the weird bloodworm monster thing swimming above him. As he rises out of the blood ocean, his arm is stuck. It's tied to some kind of rope, and in the... I'm going to say water then. In the blood is a large version of the necklace that he's got around his wrist. So this really feels like a symbol to me that Eden is weighing him down. More specifically, the guilt of the explosion is weighing him down, that it's tethering him in that blood ocean and it won't let him go. And I do think this is a symbol regardless of whether you treat the film as being real or some kind of purgatory. I still think that this is valid, that this is a symbol of guilt. But it is yet another piece of supporting evidence that he is stuck in limbo. Another symbol of guilt, which again can be taken as a symbol regardless of whether you treat the film as real or not, is at one point blood drips from the roof of the ship and lands on the little handle doodad that he uses to drive it, and he puts his hand on it and then lifts his hand up and he's got blood on his hands. And that seems like a very obvious reference to you have their blood on your hands. And like I say, this could just be a directional choice, a symbol for the viewer. But it could also be his subconscious trying to tell him, you are responsible for this is why you're here. Also, and I could have this wrong, but I think the same arm that he puts the necklace on, and the same one that's tethered in his vision, is the same arm that breaks off at the end. If that is correct, this could represent, in his final moments when he's accepted what's happened, he's now breaking free of that guilt. He's breaking free of Eden. He's breaking free of what it represents, and he's accepting his fate and surrendering to it. Now, I've mentioned this a few times already, but I think it needs its own category. The ending all gets very explosive very quickly. Bad things happen very quickly. And this could just be because the blood's got in the ship, and the blood has weird properties that melt his face off. But it could also be that after he's heard the voices talking to him, after he's been through what he's been through, and he's had flashbacks, and he's thought about it, he's accepting what's happened. He's accepting that he's guilty of killing people, and he's accepted that he's dead. This ends with him admitting that he is the butcher and accepting that, and in a way using that to get him out of his situation by destroying the ship and what it represents. One of the reasons I think the ending might be more symbolic than real is, aside from the fact that it all gets real weird real fast, which could be explained by radiation, the point where his arm comes off, he barely has any reaction to that, other than some shock. Now, okay, he could be in shock, that might remove the pain. It could be a property of the blood, that it coagulates and stems the bleeding or something like that. It could just be his mental state. He's pretty much insane by that point. But it just seemed to me that the acting was so good throughout the rest of the film, but that part fell a little flat. And again, I'm wondering, is this a deliberate choice? Did he feel no pain because he's already essentially a corpse? Now he's just being shown his true self, and that's more shocking than anything else. Regardless, I believe that the ending is showing Simon's physical state after the Eden explosion. He's not in that state because he's irradiated, he's in that state because he was caught in the explosion, and that is the state of his body afterwards, burnt, armless. And if the story is that the radiation, if the fictional story is that the radiation has caused these burns, is it possible that the Eden explosion was something to do with radiation? Maybe they exploded a reactor or something. And that could tie in why his subconscious, or whatever's creating this purgatory, has chosen to slowly kill him in the way that it's chosen. Radiation was essentially his form of death, and so he'll relive it over and over again. For this point, I am bringing us out of the film, past the fourth wall, to talk about the director, because this is another piece of evidence that points towards the fact that this type of story is a possibility for him to write. First of all, Mark is no stranger to writing stories that are essentially set in some kind of purgatory. In Who Killed Markiplier, the basic premise is that the characters are trapped in this house, which is essentially, bottom line, a type of purgatory. It's the same for Damien, it's the same for Wilford Mother-Loving Wharfstache. So Mark has form for writing these kinds of stories, so it's entirely possible that he would write another story based around this idea. Secondly, he mentioned the movie Event Horizon as being one of his inspirations, mainly for cinematography and setting and stuff like that, but it's possible it could have influenced the writing as well. I can't remember much about the film, but I believe that the basic idea is that everybody is stuck in some kind of hell. So again, if inspiration has come from a movie with a similar theme, it's entirely possible that Mark would make a movie around this idea. And finally, I've saved the most damning piece of evidence that Simon was dead to begin with for last. About the halfway point or somewhere just after, Simon falls to sleep at the wheel and has a flashback. Several flashbacks actually, but one of them is about the explosion. This is filmed in first person point of view. We are seeing it through Simon's eyes. And we see one of his, presumably his Eden colleagues, shouting at him, telling him he's done something wrong, or he hasn't put something in place. It's not very clear. But what is clear is that you see the explosion. The thing explodes, the fire comes towards him, it engulfs the person in front of him, and then it engulfs the camera. Let that sit with you for a minute, because this is something that I realised like 4 days later. If the explosion engulfs the camera, it means it engulfs Simon. And nobody else survived, so why would he? And more importantly, at the start of the film there's no indications of any burn injuries on his body. Certainly doesn't look like he was involved in an explosion. That flashback very much indicates that he is consumed by the explosion. And if that's the case, how can he ever go down in that submarine? To me, this single piece of evidence really points towards the idea that Simon died. And that the whole story is him being stuck in purgatory, in hell, because of his own guilt. The state of him at the end of the film is just showing us what his body looked like after the explosion. That's the true him now. And he's been in denial since he was welded into the iron lung. So I hope you enjoyed this psychological dig into the film and hearing a different perspective. If you have any thoughts on this theory, feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you haven't seen the film, which obviously you have, because I specifically said to go and watch it first before watching this with all its spoilers, then go and watch it. And if you have seen the film, go and watch it again with this new fresh perspective. If you've made it this far, I thank you very much for sticking with it. I hope it was enjoyable, I hope it was eye-opening and it made you think. So thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video. No, joking. I couldn't help myself. Okay, I'll just sign out with a goodbye. Goodbye.